They said I was beautiful, so they reduced me to perfume and silk. They said I was intelligent, so they turned my counsel into seduction. But what they never said was that I was dangerous. They said I was divine, a goddess cloaked in skin. So they made altars of my image, statues with hollow eyes, and prayers with empty mouths. But gods do not bleed, queens do. And the Pharaoh made sure I did not once, but over and over, until my blood became the ink that rewrote history. He was Pharaoh Akhmet, son of the vulture line, a man born with gold in his mouth and venom behind his eyes. He saw Egypt not as a legacy to preserve, but a trophy to hang on his wall of conquest. And I was the ruby he wanted to frame in glass, a gem to show, not to wield. I entered his court wearing silk in silence. He mistook both for weakness. He crowned me with ceremony, kissed me before the gods, and spoke vows that echoed like prophecy. But even the gods turned their faces when he whispered to his mistress in my temple. Even the jackals outside the city walls howled when he sealed my fate in the form of papyrus, stamped with the royal seal. Cleopatra shall be stripped of authority. And so I vanished, not in body, but in voice. I was made decoration in a court I once ruled. I watched as my servants bowed lower to his concubine than they did to me. I watched as my throne was polished for another. I stood in gold, but I was drowning in dust. He mocked my lineage. He called me the last flower of a dying tree. He drank wine in the chamber where my mother was embalmed and laughed when I wept. He sent my brother's bones to the Nubians as tribute. He touched my cheek one night and said, "Your reign was beautiful while it lasted." But what he did not know was this. A queen does not vanish. She transforms. A scar is not a wound. It is a warning. And vengeance is not a thought. It is a prophecy. I went into the crypts beneath the temple of Anubis, where the priests do not speak and the air tastes of metal. I drank the elixir of nightshade and flame. I offered my tears to the jackal-headed god and cut my palm upon the blade once used to embalm kings. I made a vow not to the heavens, but to the underworld. I would not rest until Pharaoh Akhmet choked on the ashes of his own dynasty. And so began the unraveling, not with armies, not with war, but with whispers. First, his concubine awoke screaming, her eyes hollow, her hands soaked in a blood that was not hers. Then, the Nile stopped at his city's gate, refusing to flow through his land. The priests opened scrolls and found his name erased by invisible ink. The people began to see me not as a fallen queen but as a risen curse. Pharaoh Akhmet called it superstition. He summoned magicians and mocked them in front of his court. He said I was just a woman, a memory, a relic. He said nothing could undo the living. He was right. Nothing of the living could. But I had already died. And what returned in my place was wrath given form. One by one, his allies vanished. The general who spat at my name was found in the crocodile pits with his tongue torn out and his eyes replaced with scarabs. The high priest who burned my portrait in public was struck dumb, his voice gone like mine had been. Poetic, isn't it? A silenced prophet and a resurrected queen. The people began to murmur. They painted symbols on their doors not to honor the gods, but to ward off me. They feared me, as they should. Akhmet grew restless. He tightened his grip on the kingdom, doubled his patrols, beheaded men for whispers. But power that must shout is already lost. He took the child of one of my handmaidens and held her hostage, claiming her as the rebirth of Isis. But the infant spoke my name in a voice too old for her lungs. They said she floated above the Nile, untouched by water. They said her eyes turned red when the pharaoh approached. They say a shadow walked beside her. They say that shadow was mine. He tried to cleanse the palace with fire. He burned the chamber where we once made love. He turned my old quarters into a stable for war horses. But ashes remember, and stone cannot forget the footsteps of a queen. One night, the horses trampled their own grooms. One of them spoke in a human tongue. She is coming. He banned my name from being spoken. He had scribes executed for writing the letter C. He ordered all surviving tapestries with my face destroyed. Still, the people dreamed of me. Still, the Nile whispered me. Still, the moonlight carved my silhouette on the palace gates. If this story reached you, Drop your country or city in the comments. I'd love to see how far it's traveled. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe for more emotional, true-to-life stories just like this one. He banished my name, but he could not banish my scent from his robes, nor the memory of my touch from the marble where we once danced. He drank wine till dawn, hoping to forget the way I used to laugh in the garden, barefoot, my anklets jingling like bells summoning ghosts. But memory is not so merciful. Soon, even his dreams betrayed him. He would wake screaming, soaked in sweat, calling for mothers long buried, begging servants to strip the shadows from his walls. But shadows cannot be stripped, especially not mine. I had become the dark ink in the corners of his eyes. The voice beneath his voice, his new queen, a foreign daughter of the desert, came to me in secret one night. Draped in crimson, she knelt before the statue I had hollowed, the one in the old palace shrine. She did not ask for power. She asked for mercy. I granted none. When she returned to his side, her tongue was swollen with silence, and her hair turned wide before sunrise. He tried to hide her behind curtains, said she was ill, said it was a curse from the gods. But the people knew. They always know. They saw the madness etching its lines across his face. Still, I waited, because revenge is not a moment. It is an opera. And I was composing mine in screams, in droughts, in broken omens and forbidden symbols carved beneath children's cradles. He tried to rebuild the obelisks to raise favor from the gods, but they cracked before the sun could rise. He called for my tomb to be sealed in iron and gold, as if stone in silence could hold back what I had become. But I was not in the tomb. I was in the very dust of his halls, in the breath of the doves that refused to land on his windowsill, in the laughter of the wind that howled when he tried to speak to the gods. Then came the famine. The Nile wept green instead of blue. Fish floated belly up in defiance. The crops withered without explanation. And when he demanded the priests sacrifice 12 oxen, the temple doors refused to open. Even the sacred cats avoided him, their eyes glowing with contempt. Whispers turned to wails. The people began to chant again, not for Pharaoh, but for the queen who would not die. Cleopatra, they sang, mother of thorns, flame of the dead. He heard it. Oh, how he heard it. Even in the marble silence of his chamber, he heard it. In the shuffle of sandals, in the flicker of torches, in the cold breath of night curling through the drapes. Cleopatra. He begged for alliance from distant empires, sent gold, rubies, promises, but none replied, because word had spread, not of his desperation but of my rise, of the queen who cursed a throne, of the woman who walked between life and myth. He grew thin, his robes hung like drapes over bones, his eyes sunk in searching corners that betrayed him. Mirrors were removed from the palace because he claimed they reflected me, not him. They did. And when his army betrayed him, it was not with swords, it was with silence. One by one, his guards dropped their weapons. One by one, his ministers vanished. Even his hounds refused his hand. Still, I waited, because death is not the end. Humiliation is the altar where real revenge is burned. And he was not ready yet. He fled to the upper chambers, locked himself in the hall of sky, surrounded by stars carved by artisans who once praised my beauty. He thought walls could protect him, but dreams slipped through stone. He saw me in his wine, in the cracks of the ceiling, in the eyes of his last loyal servant who began to speak in my voice. Your time is measured not in sand, but in my memory. I whispered through lips, not mine. He struck the servant down, but the voice echoed still. When he woke one morning, the throne room was filled with serpents, silent, coiled, watching. They did not strike. They waited, like I did. He offered gold to gods, blood to demons, his crown to ghosts, but none took it, because I had already taken what mattered. His legacy. The bards rewrote his name into ash. The scribes burned his deeds. The statues crumbled. Even the coins bore my face now, lips curved, eyes burning. He was becoming what he feared most, forgotten. And on the day the eclipse painted Egypt in shadow, I stood before him once more, not in flesh, in storm, in wind, in every voice that ever called me lesser, now risen to scream queen. He tried to speak, but his tongue turned to dust. He tried to kneel, but his knees shattered. He reached out, and the air turned to fire. I watched as the last of his breath curled up like incense toward the gods who had long abandoned him, and then I whispered, "History remembers me." He collapsed, a husk crowned by regret. The palace crumbled the next day. The city became a garden of silence. But the world remembered Cleopatra. The world remembered what happens when a queen is wronged. The hall was silent except for the echo of my heels against the marble floor, each step deliberate, each one slicing through the tension like a blade. Every eye followed me, some with awe, some with fear, but none with doubt anymore. The scent of burning incense coiled through the air, but underneath it, I could still smell the faint trace of smoke from the banners I had set aflame outside. His banners. His name was no longer written in gold above the gates. It was carved into the ash beneath them. I moved to the center of the throne room where his seat stood empty, a hollow monument to a man who thought himself immortal. The guards didn't move to block me, they had already bowed as I passed, their heads lowered not in forced loyalty, but in recognition of the only power left standing. He was not there to stop me. He could not be. His reign had been dissolved, piece by piece, and by the time he realized the trap closing around him, it was already too late. I didn't need to spill his blood in the square for my vengeance to be complete. I had already stripped him of everything that made him a king. His allies now called me Pharaoh. His generals carried my seal. The people he ruled had begun to forget he even existed. That was the wound that would never heal. I remembered the first time he laughed in my face, the way his voice dripped with condescension as he told me I was a decoration, a jewel meant to shine only when he allowed it. I kept that laugh locked in my memory, feeding it every time I plotted, every time I turned another of his men into mine. I had waited, silent and patient, like the Nile before the flood, biding my time until the moment the waters would rise. And when they did, they swallowed him whole. I sat on the throne now not because I forced my way into it, but because no one else dared to try. Even those who once swore fealty to him came to me willingly, offering their loyalty with trembling hands. I looked out over them now, a sea of faces waiting for my word. I could have ordered his death 100 times over, but death was mercy. Instead, I let him live, if you could call it living, exiled to a barren outpost, surrounded by nothing but desert and the echo of what he had lost. I wanted him to wake each morning and remember that the empire he once claimed was now mine, that his throne carried my weight, that his people spoke my name in reverence and his in scorn. And I wanted him to know he could do nothing about it. My victory was not the swift stab of a blade, but the slow tightening of chains he forged himself. Outside, the celebrations roared music, chants, the rhythmic pounding of drums that spoke of a future unshaken by his shadow. The markets overflowed with color again. Children ran without fear, and my name hung in the air like a promise. I had not just taken back my throne. I had rebuilt the empire stronger than it had ever been. He once told me history would forget me. Now, his name was the one struck from the records, erased with such precision it was as though he had never ruled at all. The scribes wrote my story in gold ink, line after line, page after page, a legacy that would not fade. I sat back, letting the weight of my crown settle on my head not as a burden, but as a seal of the inevitable. I had been betrayed, humiliated, and left for dead, but I had risen beyond survival. I had conquered not just his empire but the very idea that I could be broken. And as the night deepened and the fires outside painted the city in shades of victory, I knew that I had become untouchable. The desert wind carried the faintest scent of dust and ruin, and I knew it was reaching him where he sat in his lonely exile. I didn't need spies to tell me he was haunted by me, by what I had taken and by what I had become. Every grain of sand under his feet was a reminder that the marble beneath mine was no longer his. The world he built on my back had collapsed into silence, while the empire I reforged pulsed with life. I let the thought of him gnawing on his own rage feed me, but I didn't dwell on him for long. I had a kingdom to rule, and every decision I made now was a declaration that I was the sole power in this land. The court that once whispered in his favor now hung on my every word. Foreign emissaries who would have bowed first to him now knelt before me, their gifts heavy with gold, silk, and jewels, their eyes careful not to meet mine too boldly. I had learned that power wasn't just taken, it was performed, draped around you until it became the only truth others could see. I wore mine like the finest linen, light yet impossible to ignore. When I walked through the city, the people didn't just cheer, they reached for me, desperate to brush their fingers against the edge of my robe, as if touching me could bless them with the strength to survive anything. And in a way, it could. I was their proof that the powerless could rise, that betrayal could be answered not with despair but with something sharper, something that could slice through history itself. My enemies saw me now and recognized there was no crack to slip a knife through. I had outlived every plot, silenced every whisper, dismantled every shadow alliance before it could form. I was not just victorious, I was inevitable. A night, I would walk the palace gardens alone, the moonlight turning the white stone paths to silver. I would think of the moment he realized he had lost everything, the way the laughter must have died in his throat when the guards who once protected him barred him from the gates, when the city he claimed as his own cheered my name instead of his. I imagine his hands trembling as he tried to cling to some fragment of authority, only to find there was nothing left. The cruelty of it was exquisite. I had taken the one thing he could never reclaim, his place in the minds of his people. He had mocked me for being ornamental, for existing only to reflect his power. And now it was his absence that defined him. He was a void, a name nobody dared speak, a story parents told their children as a warning about the cost of arrogance. And me? I was everywhere. My image carved into temple walls, my reign written in scrolls, my victories sung in the marketplaces. I had thought revenge would feel like fire, but it felt like stone, solid, immovable, enduring. No sudden burst of satisfaction, but a deep, steady knowing that I had won so completely there would never be a reckoning against me. My enemies would not rise. They would wither in my shadow. My legacy would not just survive, it would smother any attempt to rewrite it. And as the years stretched out before me, I knew this was only the beginning. My reign was not measured in seasons or even decades. I had made myself a monument, and monuments do not fall, so I did not send for him. I did not summon him to witness the city that had erased him, nor offer him the false dignity of a confrontation. I left him to rot, where the desert sun could blister his skin and the cold nights could gnaw at his bones. That was the cruelest mercy I could give, letting him live long enough to understand every single day that he would never touch power again. Instead, I poured my focus into making sure the empire thrived under me in ways it never had under him. Trade routes that had been neglected now flourished, my coffers overflowing with gold from lands so far away their languages sounded like music I had never heard before. The temples rose higher, not to glorify the memory of any pharaoh before me, but to honor the living queen who ruled without fear. Scholars wrote of me as if I were a goddess walking among mortals, and I let them, because in truth, that was what I had become to them. The old nobility learned quickly that their survival depended on loyalty. The moment they wavered, I stripped them of their titles and lands without hesitation. There was no second chance. Betrayal had only one reward, and I was the one who decided what form it took. They learned that lesson in whispers, watching others vanish quietly from the court. I ruled with the precision of a blade, never swinging wildly, but always striking true. Sometimes I would stand at the highest balcony of the palace, looking out over the city as the sun sank into the horizon, dyeing the Nile in molten gold. I could hear the hum of life below, merchants calling out their wares, children's laughter mixing with the rhythm of drums, the prayers rising from temple steps. All of it was mine, not because I demanded it, but because I had earned it. They loved me not as a ruler forced upon them, but as the queen who had faced down death, humiliation, and ruin, and had not just survived but conquered. There were nights when messengers would arrive breathless, bearing news that another of his allies had been found broken, desperate, trying to rally the faintest flicker of rebellion. Each time, I let them crumble without lifting a finger. I did not need to chase them. The weight of my name alone crushed them before they could even stand. It was a sweeter form of revenge, making them destroy themselves under the pressure. of my existence. He, I was told, had grown old quickly. The desert had stolen his youth. The bitterness had stolen his mind. Some days, he wandered aimlessly, muttering to himself, replaying the moment everything was taken from him. His hands shook, his back bent. The once proud king had become a shadow no one feared, and no one pitied. I didn't need to kill him. I had done something far worse. I had made him forget what it felt like to be a man who mattered. And when I think of him now, I do not think of the betrayal or the pain. I think of the look on his face in that final moment, when he realized I had taken it all, and I would never give it back. That look will outlive him. It will outlive me. It will be etched into the story of my reign forever, a silent warning to anyone who would dare to stand against me. My revenge was not an act. It was a lifetime, and I was only getting started, and so I did. The seasons turned. The Nile rose and fell, and with each cycle my dominion only deepened. The people began to speak of my reign not in years, but in eras before me, and after me. The markets swelled with goods from across the seas, the granaries never emptied, and the air of the capital was thick with music, incense, and prosperity. I walked through the streets sometimes not in disguise, but openly, so my people could see that their queen was not some distant phantom locked in marble halls. They reached for me. They knelt before me. They called my name like a prayer and a promise. I had become the embodiment of their hope, their pride, their vengeance against all who had ever tried to chain us. The nobility no longer tested me. They had watched too many of their kind vanish, stripped of wealth, erased from memory, reduced to whispers. Those who remained learned to cling to my side not out of fear alone, but out of the understanding that my shadow was the only one worth living under. My court became a place of brilliance, poets, architects, philosophers, all finding in me the patronage to make the impossible real. We raised monuments that would outlast stone, carved my image into walls that the sun would touch for thousands of years, and he rotted in obscurity. The last I heard, he no longer spoke in full sentences, only muttering fragments of his own name as if afraid it would slip away entirely. His followers abandoned him one by one, until only the wind was left to hear his madness. There was no empire for him to reclaim, no allies to rally, no story left to tell except the one I had written for him, that he had been defeated by the very woman he called useless. His world had ended, yet he still breathed, forced to endure every single dawn, knowing that somewhere I sat on the throne he lost. When foreign kings sent envoys, they came not to challenge me, but to beg for alliance. Some brought gold, others rare treasures, others their own bloodlines to marry into mine. I accepted only what served me and discarded the rest. I had no need for desperate gifts. My empire was already richer than theirs could ever dream. And still, they bowed. They all bowed. I ruled untouched, untouchable. Every threat was crushed before it could draw its first breath. Every whisper of rebellion turned into a confession of loyalty before it could grow teeth. I did not just win, I redefined what it meant to win. I made survival look like defeat, and defeat look like extinction. I had not just avenged myself. I had rewritten the very story of power so that there was no chapter in which I was not victorious. And when I think of the day they will carve my tomb, I know the stone will not speak of the man who tried to destroy me. His name will be dust. Mine will be the one the world remembers, the one that survives the turning of the ages. And when they speak it, they will remember the queen who could not be killed, the woman who rose from ruin and made the whole world kneel. That is my legacy. That is my revenge. And it is eternal.